Welcome to the Asia Climate Finance Podcast, where our host and expert guests delve into and scrutinize the pressing issues and emerging trends in climate business and climate finance. We greatly appreciate your support. Please like, review, and subscribe to the podcast to help us grow and reach a wider audience. Be sure to take note of the disclaimers at the conclusion of each show. And now, here is your host, investor, analyst, and author, Joseph Giacobelli.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. Before we start, allow me to wish all of our listeners a very happy and healthy 2025. In our first episode for this year, episode 57, our guest is a leading Asia energy economist, Mike Thomas of the Lantau Group. He shared his thoughts on 2024 trends as well as his 2025 outlook, 2025 and beyond, I should say. For 2024, he highlighted improved investment fundamentals, growing demand for renewables, and significant market reforms in some markets as some of the key trends. Looking ahead, again, 2025 and beyond, Mike expects continued strong growth for renewable energy in the region despite the geopolitical uncertainties. He expects more solar hybrid projects or similar type projects, and also a realization that there are some very significant challenges with gas-fired generation flexibility. And finally, we talk a little bit about the prospects for nuclear power around the region. So I started the conversation by asking Mike about his 20 thoughts about 2024. Please enjoy the show, and please do get back to us with any comments, thoughts, or ideas for topics. Thank you. Again, enjoy the show.
Thanks, Joseph. It's good to be here, and it's also a really interesting time. 2024 was kind of a momentous year in some respects for what we saw in Asia. I didn't really sense a particular thing or moment. What it seemed to be to us at the Lantau Group was really accumulating improved fundamentals and greater pressure from end users and nudges in several of our core markets in a general direction of reform, which was unusual considering how slow some of the markets have been in the past decade to adopt sort of more openness. For example, Malaysia, under its government, has developed a whole range of more energy-friendly, energy-focused, energy transition-oriented energy sector reforms, probably more reforms in the energy sector in Malaysia than any other sector. And the beginnings of putting that country on the map for some of our clients who previously weren't looking at it at all. Malaysia hadn't really had the reputation of being that open for business. They'd had large-scale solar tenders, but it was all during COVID, and so it was a little bit up and down. But now more recent developments around AI and data centers, and whether they locate in Singapore or Johor or other kinds of developments have really put a lot of proactive users in advocating opportunities for them. And then the government has been racing to develop programs, not always perfectly, but I mean, we've got things coming out of the woodwork in a sense of where they weren't there before. The Philippines, similarly, it just becomes more fundamentals oriented. So while there's been a lot of gas developments, and very importantly so, there weren't really major policy shifts in the Philippines, just sort of the continuous recognition that it's been a great place to do business as an energy company, whether you're international or local. And over the past decade, many firms have accumulated sites and opportunities that have been waiting for the right moment. And I would say the Actis investment in Terra Solar is one of those that sort of demonstrated that catalyzing point as a very significant project. I don't think anybody with all respect to all of Asia, the idea that the Philippines would come forward with one of the largest projects, solar hybrid projects in the world, was probably not on anybody's bingo card. So I think that is, I've said that pretty outstanding, really. And then, I think there have been the beginnings of offshore wind in Asia. There had been some in previous years around Taiwan and interest in around Japan, but a little bit more activity across the region and a lot more investigation by governments, but not always finding that it was the least cost, but or the easiest. And of course, in the rest of the world, there's been some rollback of opportunities in the U.S. East Coast, which highlights some of the difficulties of bringing offshore wind to market. But the idea that you have this engine of renewable energy development. It's kind of like the old saying, prime the pump. A number of things just have to happen, and a lot of it started happening in 2023 and 2024 that lay the groundwork and plant the seeds, if I'm going to throw all the metaphors in there, to for what should be a very interesting 2025. And I think that's generally true across the region. Our work is been pan Asia, and we see those developments and those changes. So 2024 wasn't a single event kind of thing. U.S. election was late in the year, all of the anticipation of that, but that's something we can talk about separately. But I think the main thrust for us in 2024 was renewables just kept getting stronger. The gas story kept getting more complicated, and the solar hybrid story started to make a dramatic appearance, and it's that's a path that's it's going to continue.
Right. So you were saying that you would summarize it as saying improved investment fundamentals in general in 2024.
Yep.
You mentioned pressure from end users and more examples of shift towards more open markets in terms of power reforms. With regards to the second one, pressure from end users, do you mind clarifying that a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's really interesting issue, this whole end user. What does it mean for the energy transition? We ended 2023 with a project for sort of a decarbonization roadmap that we did for one of our clients. It began to explore all the different ways in which a country could decarbonize, and we characterized it in three waves. The first wave was the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, right? And then as the integration of renewables became greater, more complications started to arise. That's where the batteries, ancillary services, and other aspects. And then finally, if you really go all the way to decarbonization, you were going to start running out of in-country solar or wind, possibly in many markets, and you were going to start either importing green molecules, or you were going to move to a different type of green electron, like some longer term new technology. Now, the end user side is really interested in this first wave. Get the solar, get a battery, maybe whether they go to 24/7. Take advantage. 24/7 green power is up. Some do, some don't. Many are driving for as many green electrons as they can, using whatever system, policy, regulatory, technological sort of arrangement that they can put together that is least cost for them. So they've been really agitating what I call this first wave, how to grab as much of the green, the cheapest, fastest developable green energy. And it's been motivated in Asia because they have had success doing this in US and in Europe, often with policy, tax incentives, as well as other aspects that have allowed them to do that. And they're trying to replicate this. So a good bit of the on-the-ground activity in Asia is working with governments, regulators, utilities to identify where things can be made more like what they're seeing in the rest of the world, or where they can get first dibs on a good green opportunity, or where the system has enough capacity to absorb, say, more green electrons without creating a wave two, what I call a wave two problem, which is when the integration of renewable energy at the system level starts to making people realize that there are some additional costs that have to be incurred, and there'll be some additional investments that will be needed, such as in transmission or ancillary services support or additional batteries or firming capacity and all that. So what I'm really seeing in the first wave for the end users is how to get momentum in Asia as fast as possible, faster than maybe the governments are aware, faster than the system has been moving. And that's where you start seeing policies like Malaysia's corporate renewable energy support scheme, CRESS, or others. They're not fully thought through. But they're obviously very responsive, though, to end user looking for more control over their contracting of green energy. So they're almost like a series of bolt-ons or odd lots for tapping the existing system. They're not fundamental change, they're options that have been added. And we see a little bit of that in Malaysia. We've seen a little bit of that in the Philippines, which is a more advanced market. We see that in every market, but very, very, very slowly. But that's this first wave. And I think it's more like, people knocking on the door. How do I get in and do something here where that is like what I'm able to do elsewhere, without really thinking through any of the consequences, without thinking through any of the other longer term system reforms. Just get the ball rolling. So that's what I mean by end users being sort of a catalyzing force for initiating change. But I will say this, Joseph. I think that wave two, if you let the end users get whatever they want, the Asian markets are not sophisticated enough to handle that. So there'll be a balancing act, how far you can go, how much freedom that you can give to the end users before you start running into, true, honest to goodness, old-fashioned system integration challenges. And I think that's what 2025 starts to look like. We start to see sort of folks anticipating, well, what happens if we accelerate? What else do we need to do?
One last thing about 2024, and this is purely my kind of non-empirical, non-scientific feeling about it, that there seems in a lot of Asian jurisdictions more conversations between the private sector and the public sector, where traditionally Asia has very been public sector driven, as in,
Yes.
We are the government, we decide, we determine. Where now there's a little bit more conversation between, what does the private sector actually want and private sector actually need. Is that just my kind of like wishful thinking, or did you also witness that?
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's whether that's end users or whether that's investor community, whether it's the funds-based or platform-based renewables developers say, we can do this really fast, we can do this really well. We just need access. We have the capital, we have the technology, we put the supply chain together, we've got teams, we want to be on the ground. We see the inherent value in having a position in multiple markets throughout the region. And yours is where we want to be right now. And who do I need to talk to? What do we need to do? How do we need to educate? What do we need to change to make that possible? Whether that's reforms on land acquisition, approvals, transmission sightings, whether that's setting new targets, or setting new auctions or policies, or opening the bilateral market, because a lot of times people want to negotiate something more uniquely. It's exactly that conversation is new. And it really started to grow I think, beginning in 2023, but throughout 2024. And the momentum is very strong, I think, for 2025.
And I promise this is my last question about 2024 before we talk about the future. If you are sitting now, we're sitting now at the end of 2024, looking back, is there anything that kind of has happily or negatively surprised you? And any events, any trends that you saw in 2024?
Thanks, Joseph. Good question. There's a couple of things, both on the positive and the negative. On the positive, markets like like China, have continued to do reform-oriented activities. And for us at TLG, there was a period of time, perhaps during COVID and perhaps during there's always been a little bit of geopolitical stuff going on these days, but it seems like China's opening up on the green side has been a positive, and we're seeing things happen again. But the negative was coal came back into the conversation. So now, what it's doing there and where it's going, and to what extent it is the answer to a problem that exists, or an answer to a problem that people anticipate, or an answer to a problem that doesn't exist but people worry about it, is the whole security of supply. And I think the thing that has motivated that has been demand growth uncertainty. So demand growth forecasting has always been a dark art, and it is a darker art, super dark. It is the night sky in a remote location, dark, very, very hard to do, because now you take econometrics, which is looking backwards and going forwards, and that never captures things that weren't in the past. So it's great. You can be very sophisticated, but you can only be as smart as you can extract information that has already occurred and extrapolate from that in a sensible way. So now you have digitization, AI, and where the data centers are going to go. So I think on the dark side of this is how much demand growth is there really on the demand side? How many data centers are being proposed in different places? But it's really the same data center. We just don't know where we're going to put it yet. So we're going to have 5 conversations. It's in Singapore. No, it's not. It's in Johor. No, it's in Indonesia. It all depends on the grid. It's so some of this is really complicating the risk profile of a lot of projects. And I think that is why I put it in the dark side. I think that's even harder than the coal part. And, the coal is because people want to keep up, but you can't build a coal plant very fast. The data centers can be built super fast. So you have already, you've got a difficult balancing act between those who say the only way to keep the system going is to build more baseload capacity, and others are saying the only way you can do anything that keeps up with demand is to do faster to market technologies, which or you need a new way of doing that. So to me, maybe not the most artful answer to this, but to me, those two things: will coal come back, and why? And who will do it, and will they really make money at it, or is it just the first 5 or 6 years, and then all of a sudden, who knows what, back end risk story? And then how do we parse the demand growth, and what is the appropriate policy settings for a country trying to plan an electricity system the old-fashioned way, with demand coming in 50 to 100 megawatt hyperscale blocks, but may or may not happen. The old saying, if you build it, they will come, is not necessarily true. Sometimes you build it and you pay for it.
No, I absolutely agree. If you were to ask me that question, what surprised me in 2024, and this is going to be the segue for 2025, is number one, that nuclear came back to the conversation, something which was in the kind of woodwork, in the hidden woodlands for a while. And the second thing is actually some countries very seriously talking about the phasing out or phasing down of coal-fired power plants, which for many, many years has appeared as just wishful thinking, but now it seems it's a little bit more concrete, although we haven't found the magic wand to resolve that, but unless somebody takes a hit.
I didn't mention nuclear. I never really thought it quite left the conversation, because in a lot of conversations in the parts of Asia where we work, the nuclear was really never serious. I mean, whether it can come back in the Philippines is a really interesting question. Whether it can get started in a country like Malaysia, which has looked at this 3 or 4 times in my lifetime, is a good question. Whether any of these markets should be first mover markets is real significant doubt on my mind. But China has certainly resumed its nuclear and in many ways leapt over a lot, and we watch that very carefully. So, I think that's always been kind of a wave three solution for me. And the question was, who was going to do all the pilots? Who was going to do the work that brought the cost curve down, and whether that was an ASEAN country, or whether that was a larger Asian market, or whether that was China. So that's the only reason I didn't mention it, is because I feel like it's been cooking along all the way, and all of a sudden we're back in the conversation, which is wonderful, as I think it's quite an important part of the wave three solution. But we're still a ways. The reason I mentioned coal was, perhaps the most significant words spoken post-COP, where Indonesia's promised to roll out of coal, which was something I wasn't really expecting. Many of my favorite countries in Asia don't make any commitments whatsoever towards, like the Philippines, they haven't really ever said that they were going to go to zero, but they make good progress anyway. I don't think the commitments matter that much. It's much more a ground game of inches and yards, and not big, bold promises. But it's great to see that. And it does change the tone, and maybe help people understand that this is still the direction of things. But I still don't know how you get a coal plant financed, without a government coming in or offering a very large subsidy or some kind of emergency tender. So it's quite a complicated little.
It is, and I guess that's definitely a conversation for another day. It's more not today. But looking now at, I call it 2025 outlook, but it's really more, the next 25 years till 2050 and even maybe beyond. What are the kind of key things that you see happening in 2025 or beyond 2025? I guess the elephant in the room is, the new administration in the US from the 20th of January. We have absolutely no idea what they will do, and once they do it, we don't know if there's going to be any U-turns. So let's not try to predict it. I guess if we could predict it, we would be very, very wealthy and very, very retired. But in terms, we do know that that's going to create some form of investment uncertainty, which people that are investing in long duration assets do not like. It may also create some kind of disruptions on the supply chain front as well. So apart from this big elephant in the room, and you may have some specific comment on it, what are the kind of 2025 and beyond kind of, I don't want to call it predictions, but let's call them predictions anyway.
Well, we'll stick our finger in the air here and see. So one thing that we've observed, and that we are always advising our clients, particularly those in the public policy sector setting targets, is that the way economics works is almost never smooth, continuous path. Because, like, the economics of an investment, it's not that one single factor is improving and every single factor is always going in. Sometimes one aspect, like technology costs, might be falling, but you're competing against a fuel cost that's also falling. So which one's falling faster? Economics is relative, not absolute. So what you can have is a situation where you have two or three things that don't seem to have changed very much, but they all changed in the same direction. And that creates, in our experience anyway, sort of a ratchet effect, where there might be a plateau, there'll be quiet time, and maybe people say it's because of uncertainty, but uncertainty is just another way of saying I've got 4 or 5 factors and 3 of them are going one way and 2 of them are going another, or none of them have moved yet and I was expecting them to. It's some combination of that. But during that plateau, when that uncertainty is happening, what are people doing? And I don't think they've ever stopped. They're still out there building their land and site portfolios. They're still getting they're prioritizing their connection points. They're still working with the governments and all that. So my projection is that just like it's always been. We're going to see a period where people are digesting the geopolitical uncertainty, the Trump tariff type uncertainty. They may hold their fire for a little while, but underneath the almost inexorable economics of renewable energy that has just continued to improve over time, quite dramatically at times in steps, against what I would say is what is the renewable energy competing with? It's competing with gas, which has demonstrated its volatility, its uncertainty, and so maybe it will be low, but then it could be high again, and people have to make, like you say, 20, 25-year investments. So the fact that I might have 2 or 3 good years doesn't necessarily mean that I have enough. So I look at this and I think of it as a ratchet, and I think that what happens then is, will 2025 be a plateau year, or will it be an acceleration year? Will it be a year of preparation and readiness, and 2026 will be a year of a pop or an explosion, or will some of this uncertainty resolve a little bit faster? And I'm kind of in the camp that it will go faster despite all the uncertainty, that renewable energy will accelerate with or without the U.S. If the U.S. closes off to China, where's this stuff that China makes goes? It finds another home in Asia. Maybe that's a good thing for Asia in terms of cost. Most of China's exports in energy will be renewable energy related. If that comes in at a lower cost, then is more insulated against lower natural gas prices, for example. So again, you that point that it's all about the relativities of things. So I guess I'm hedging a little bit there, Joseph, because it doesn't really require a huge pop. All of our renewable energy clients are going to continue to be very bullish on renewable energy opportunities. They will be frustrated by grid connection timings, just like they are all around the world. Welcome to the club. Policymakers will set targets that don't necessarily have the full system support. The planners will scratch their head and wonder how in the world they're going to do that, or without traditional technologies. Then solar hybrid will come in and compete against mid-merit gas. Maybe it's worth saying one more thing about that. I mean, the Terra Solar project is just one of many global emerging solar hybrid projects. But in Asia, where gas is imported as LNG in many markets and is therefore at the more expensive side of the gas pricing curve, if there's land and a reasonable solar resource, I think what Terra Solar shows is that it's competitive against imported LNG. And that's a project that goes, sort of semi baseload type power from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's a pretty significant chunk of time. And many Asian markets do have land and solar enough to make that work. And even if their solar is not quite as good, a 10% change in the price of solar panels or small improvement starts to offset some of that. So I look at those hyperscale projects and I get really excited. I think that we start seeing more of that emerge in 2025, and gas will have to start finding its role for mid-merit and backup, but maybe not quite as much as was expected. Anyway, it's just a curious thought. It's how will the hyperscale solar hybrid battery projects, how many more of them will we see in Asia is really my biggest question. And I think the economics are quite attractive, and I think it would be kind of a shame if we got to the end of 2025 without seeing 4 or 5 others.
Right. I mean, the key to that is really the energy storage part of it. And if you look at, all the experts, I don't think there's anybody out there who disagrees that the price of energy storage on a per kilowatt hour basis is going to either fall or dive over the next, 2 to 5 years. I think there's a consensus on that. And the other thing also is that there are newer technologies coming through which are going to resolve some of the critical metals situations as well. And those are developing pretty fast. And there's a small experimental project called China, which kind of serves as the hotbed of experimentation there. So I mean that, you know, my feeling on energy storage is quite strong. Plus, on the other, and I'm not even talking about things like vehicle to grid, you know, with the EV kind of popping up everywhere. But in terms of going back, in terms of nuclear, do you feel that, although we've been talking about it, I mean, like we talked about before, I mean, Asia has been talking about nuclear forever. You've got several countries in Asia that have nuclear power agencies or research institutes. Some of them even have small micro test pilots in universities or whatever it is. Do you think the time is ripe for a little bit of a pop on that, or you would still be a little bit cautious on it, especially for Southeast Asia?
The time is not wrong. It's not exactly how I would recommend just any country spending its resources right now, mostly because we took quite a detailed look at setting up a nuclear program in one ASEAN country. I'll just leave the name out for now. It doesn't really matter. About 20 years ago, maybe 15. And, you know, it went down some ways, but you really wanted not the first of a kind, you wanted to get to the nth of a kind. You had so much cost to amortize over in terms of the setup and the safety and the team and all of that. And the U.S. experience in Georgia with Vogtle was sort of that. It turned out to be much, much, much more difficult and expensive to assemble the whole, you know, logistics supply chain to build the station, plus, you know, the learning for the first one and so many times. And then they stopped, and then the whole supply chain got disbanded, and then they're pretty much back to start up again if they were ever to do another one. If you're not prepared for that, I'm not saying everybody's going to have the U.S. experience. I would certainly not expect that. But the first one's going to be more expensive. It better be. I mean, if it's not the most expensive one that you build, you're doing something wrong, because you've got to establish so many things that don't normally exist, and people don't fully appreciate what's involved in building that network of support. So that first one's going to be more expensive, and it better be followed by, you know, the second, the third, and the fourth, and the fifth one. This is where China just excels. It put things on a long pause for a while it adjusted its technology focus, and now it's unleashing them at a more rapid rate and capturing once again the scale. And everybody looks at it and says, "Oh, it must be so cheap," but I don't think people look inside quite enough. So when I look at an ASEAN country, for sure, I don't see that. I see the first and maybe the second, but I don't see the run to end. So unless you're really, really wanting to be at the avant-garde, contributing to the world's knowledge base of pilot programs and wanting to do it on a managed scale test or something, you really have to go in knowing that that's what you're going to do. And maybe Malaysia is best placed for that at the moment because it has looked at this before. But I'm more skeptical about other markets not quite being big enough. That's the only part. The conversation, I welcome the conversation, really important conversation. Whether 2025 is the year that we keep talking or start doing, I think it's still talking. I think it's still talking. So I don't have that one on my bingo card for 2025. Maybe some announcements, maybe some teams, maybe some focus efforts, some study tours, but I don't see anything close to commitments yet. And partly it's because of what you also said, Joseph, is that the falling cost of storage makes it less and less necessary to move to nuclear super fast. You can offset a lot of the detriments of solar with cheaper storage, and with the exception of the more equatorial Asian countries, which have a harder time, full year high load utilization. So you've got to figure out what to do. But more seasonal systems like the Philippines, you put a nuclear unit in, and what do you do in the third and the fourth quarter when it's cooler and demand is really low? And how do you actually make money from a nuclear unit during those periods? So there's no heating load, to pull things up. So yeah, it's a bit of a head scratcher for me as to how far to go with that. But that's for Asia. But certainly China is, and then if China exports that, eventually is able to do so more effectively, then I think all bets are off. But to me, that's still 5 years from now.
To put one idea in your head, one of the answers could be, SMRs, small modular reactors.
Yeah.
Of the 10 megawatt, 30 megawatt, 100 megawatt size, then I think the parameters are a little bit different.
Completely agree with that, and I guess because then you can see the scale. You can see the repetition. So if I'm going to be wrong, let me be wrong there, because I think that's really the most promising solution for many of the countries. The other is people don't always appreciate the amount of solar and land-based wind that's available in Asia is not enough to keep up with demand. So there, no matter what one thinks about traditional renewable energy, it is limited, and electrification will push demand up fast enough that we'll start running out of the best and good enough sites, before the 2030s are over. And so at that point, really, we're on our own in terms of what's next. So I think looking beyond 2030s, to 2040s, that's my wave 3 thing. Somebody's got to be doing something with SMRs by then.
Well, one final question about 2025. So, with the Lantau Group, you guys got clients all over Asia, or you work all over Asia. Your clients are from all over the world. But in terms of just getting a sense when you talk to them about how they feel, and this is kind of not empirical, but just purely subjective, how they feel about 2025 and beyond. Do you see the same level of interest as this time of last year? More interest or less interest on a year-on-year basis?
It's interesting. We're seeing more interest going into 2025. With the back half of 2024 was stronger than the front half of 2024 for us. We're still growing, so some of that is maybe just our natural riding, our sort of our natural level. As we grow, of course, we're going to do more. So it's a little bit circular, but can't really say that the world is doing more. We're just doing a larger share of it. I think there's a little bit of that, but my sense is that the Philippines is a good barometer for us. We've worked there for 20 years since the market started, and it is just as busy and active, maybe more so. We're seeing maybe more gas to power questions in different markets. I'm guessing we'll see more tricky gas to power questions, tricky commercial merchant exposure gas to power questions than we saw in 2024. 2024 was mostly renewable energy and larger business strategy questions. And I'm seeing more gas-related advisory opportunities for us because people are realizing it competes with renewable energy, and the batteries are there, and the molecule management is much more difficult. But I think the volume of activity is probably increasing because most markets are seeing demand growth increases. That's really driving a lot of it.
That's great. Mike, any kind of concluding remarks or any kind of like summarizing thoughts that you have, or any forward-looking statements are welcome as well?
Yeah, three things come to mind, Joseph. One is I think the age of the solar hybrid, more customized solar battery load shaping opportunity at a larger scale is upon us. We're seeing that in the Philippines, and we'll see that increasingly throughout Asia. So that's a milestone. It's not just intermittency anymore, it's packaging, and I think that we're getting there. I think second, the complexity around integrating gas into the system has increased because it competes with renewables. And so the traditional role that gas has played in Asian markets, if it's domestic gas, often it's been baseload, and that makes less sense. It now moved towards more flexibility, but flexibility is a tricky part if you're dependent on the LNG supply chain. So if you've got a domestic gas resource and a large pipeline network, you've got line pack, you've got the mobility to use more, use less. But the LNG means more trading, more trading orientation. So I think for 2025, the solution to gas will be to try to figure out how to do flexibility in either trading across markets of electricity so that you can continue to use gas, or getting more adept at trading your gas so that you can divert your cargoes when you really don't need one, when it turns out to be cooler than expected or demand didn't grow or something. And then I think the third part is the tricky part, is the government, regulators, and markets themselves have to raise their game. The markets that win in the energy transition are the ones that provide options for investors, provide safety. You can say, oh, merchant markets are risky. Yes, they're risky if that's all you've got. But if you don't have one at all, if there's no merchant market at all, then investing in that market is risky because you can't do it at all unless you have a contract. With the merchant market, you can invest with a partial contract or and you can do a lot more flexible things. So the more the Asian market reforms continue, like what we've seen start to happen in Malaysia and have been announced further in Vietnam and in others, where there's more paths to market, we're really, really excited to see that. Because I think that without those additional opening up options, the energy transition does not progress fast enough in Asia. So those are our three things. The hyperscale solar battery, enter center stage. Gas flexibility more than gas molecules becomes the mantra, and the markets have to open up to provide the investors with alternatives so that they can manage their risk and their portfolios. If I see a little progress in all three of those areas in 2025, then that'll be a great Santa Claus kind of moment.
I will write this down, and then when we do this again at the end of next year, in 2020, at the end of 2025, we'll see where we're at. Apart from the global geopolitical complexities, increasing complexities, my experience, especially during my recent trip in Asia, is very, very, very bullish. It's not going to be linear. There's going to be quite a few bumps, but I think we can be bullish.
Yeah, I do too. We're super excited about it. Joseph, it's really a great place to be, and look forward to seeing you here.
That's great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's always a wonderful conversation.
Joseph, it's great fun. Great way to wrap up the year. Who knows how much of this is true, but everybody can take it with a grain of salt. If the energy transition rolls on, it's going to do whatever it does anyway, and we're just going to be along for the ride, help people where we can. It's good stuff.
And we will enjoy the ride, indeed.
Exactly.
Thank you again, Mike. Thank you so much.
Take care, Joseph. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. Please be advised that this podcast is presented for educational purposes only. None of the information provided should be construed in any way as investment advice. Always consult with a licensed investment professional before making any investment decisions. Additionally, please note that the views and opinions expressed by our guests are personal and may not reflect the views and opinions of their current or previous employers.